Well, good morning, everyone. We're going to begin this study here, leaving where we left off yesterday in Judges 15 and see where we go today. So we need to ask for the Lord's leading. Let's pray. Dear Father in heaven, we are so grateful for this new day, for the time to study with brothers and sisters in Christ, and to continue to learn of you. We pray for your presence here through your Spirit, through the Spirit of Christ that speaks to our hearts and reveals your character. Help us, Lord, to see wonderful things in your law, in your word. And Lord, we know that the things that you have been showing us are meant to strengthen us and equip us to minister to those around us. I pray for each person's personal ministry, for those that we have contact with, that we are led to share your truths and to reveal your character. We just pray, Lord, that you can continue to use us and that we can see your mighty power working in the hearts of those around us. Be with us now in this study. We pray and ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So, good morning, everyone. Now, yesterday to me was one of those times when, something unexpected happens. We see something, and it takes us a little while to process it. But the main thing we saw, and I did some research on it, and we definitely have come to the right conclusion in interpreting that this is Pentecost. The Judges 15 verse 1 is referring to Pentecost when he goes to visit his wife with this kid of the goats. And the real significant thing for me personally just has to do with the paper that I'd published. I've sent everyone the link to that who's in my email list. And especially since there was that one verse, Leviticus 23 verse 21, that had to do with Pentecost in the self-same day. And I had originally neglected to put that in the paper. Somehow I missed that when I was going through all the different self-same days. So I had to add that to my paper. And so that was kind of interesting, just how it happened. And this point of the self-same day is that this is an anniversary, this bone day. So we talked about that yesterday. And we can see how in our lines, these things have been significant. So I didn't know how to address them in the past. But to me, they were just kind of like an echo or an aftershock of a date that we had on our lines. And I would find that 1 year later, those dates would be significant in the structure of the lines. And an example that I used, of course, was July 18th. And with July 18th, we'd had this presentation on the 160 days that Dwight had done. But that it was I'm not going to go through that whole study, but it was really this echo of this of July 18th. So this is July 18th, 2021, that we had this structure dealing with that. And other dates, November 22nd being repeated, things like that. So when we look at this on our lines, and I need to open that. So what this helped us to understand is that these are basically the spring first fruits. Both of them, there's the one that happens with the barley harvest and one with the wheat harvest. And that's going to be Collins and Odilio's presentations. And we're going to take these as representing the two loaves or the two tables. And that means that we're going to take this wheat harvest is Judges 15. Now, as we're putting this on a line, we have to go through all of Judges 15. So whether that includes all of Judges 15, or we're going to have the story with Samson and Delilah being a repeat and enlarge, I haven't decided yet. So one of the things that happened here with Judges 15 is in some ways, it's a continuation of Judges 14, right? So we had in Judges 14, we were brought to this here, this out of the way, right? So we had these 49 days in here, and this is the 20th day of the 9th month. Now, some people have said that this is a year later that Samson comes, but I don't think that would be correct. I don't think he's going to wait an entire year. But, you know, it could be a month later. Because if we're going to take this numbering of the days, but it's hard to say at how long there is between when he had the wedding and the riddle, and then when he comes to the wheat harvest. So it's going to be on Pentecost, though. Now, so the question is, I guess, going back to Judges 14. I mean, we have these chapters. Of course, the chapters are created by man, but we see significance in these numbers and the chapters and how they're structured. But if we're going to look at this story, Samson's marriage here, and we start reading in chapter 15, the reason that they put a new chapter here, so the reasoning that they're going to use, has to do with Haya at the beginning, right? So it was, right? Or so it came to pass. They often look at these sort of dividings that are in the Hebrew scriptures. And sometimes there's the paragraph marking sort of things in there, which is the end of a scroll. So how they end up coming up with these chapters. Sometimes you can see that there are chapters that really they shouldn't be divided there. And I think this is probably the case with this one. That is, chapter 15 is a continuation of chapter 14 for the first part. Right. And you know, so I don't know if where we're going to take the rest of this chapter. And, you know, and then we're going to get the story of Delilah. So that's going to be another story. So maybe 14 and 15 just go together. I haven't decided, right? So, you know, how these stories work, but it could be that the story of Delilah is going to be this repeat and enlarge, and chapter 15 is carrying on this structure. Now, one of the things about 15 verse 1, what else do we notice about Judges 15:1? Just the chapter 15:1, the number there.
You have 151, so 15th day of the first month.
Okay, right. So 15th day of the first month.
We can connect it to the shekels.
Okay, so to the shekels, right? So the 151 shekels. That's if we're using a manna of 60 rather than 50, right? So it gives us an extra 25 shekels. And so that was the one that brought us from 1888 to 2014 in Parminder's understanding of those shekels. Right, so we had the 126 shekels, or pardon me, from 1863 to 2014. So he had 126 shekels from 1888 to 2014, using that 126 shekels that we had from 1863 to 1989. So the difference was the 25, but so you could use the 151 from 1863 to 2014 as well. So they gave us a second witness for 2014. Now, when we deal with 2014, and this is maybe a bit more complicated of a question, but back in 2017, how did I understand 2014 and 2017? Does anybody know how I understood that? This is connected to Samuel Snow's letters.
I remember you had 2014 connected to sunset.
Okay, right, because Chawatu was connecting 2014 to sunset, and I was trying to understand the Passovers, right? So you have a Passover prior to sunset, because sunset would be April 19th, right, in Millerite history, because if midnight is July 21st, well, sunset has to be April 19th, right? Just logic. Now, but we had the two Passovers, the one on the one side and the one on the other. But we know connected with Passover is Pentecost. And so Samuel Snow had this first letter that was written on the date that the temple was dedicated in 515 BC, the biblical date. And then he had it published on Passover, the first Passover, the one that was on April 3rd, 1844. And then his second letter was published on Passover, May 2nd, 1844. So that's the correct Passover. And in between that, of course, is April 19th. And then his third letter was written on Pentecost, right? And that's the one that was published 5 days later. So it was written on the 6th of Sivan, or the 6th day of the third month, which of course becomes this symbol in that history as well, dealing with the 63 days, which is part of the structure. And then you're going to have it republished 5 days later, or published 5 days later, which is the 11th day of the third month, which doubled becomes June 22nd, and Pentecost happened to be June 22nd. So it goes back to the date that it's written. It's in this sort of a self-referencing symbol. And so the way that I was trying to address this, so there's a comment there in the chat from Iran too, dealing with 151. So Jesus Christ, the normal sum equals 151, and Apollyon and Abaddon, the normal sum equals 151. That's kind of interesting in English gematria. So anyway, so I was looking at 2014 and saying, well, that's going to be this date in between these two Passovers. And then, well, Pentecost would be 2017. So this is how I was understanding it in 2017. So my view then at the time is that, we were at that place within Samuel Snow's letters. Now, July 18th ends up being his fourth letter, right? That's the one that's 3 days before midnight. And it's really July 18th that's going to end up symbolizing the prediction before midnight. And it ends up becoming, because on September 23rd, I presented this at Lambert Church regarding July 18th being the prediction before midnight. It's the end of that structure of Samuel Snow's letters. And then 3 days later, he presents July 18th. Now, we can see if you go from July 17th, July 18th symbol, and you go to 2020, you can see that becomes 3 days later, right? 2020 is three years after September 23rd, not exactly to the day, but you understand what I mean? It's 3 years. So we go from 2017 and we can count 3 days to 2020. And it's interesting too, September 23rd on the biblical calendar is the first day of the 7th month. So it's beginning a year, and it's also ending year, what the Jews would call in a shorthand is 777. Is its year, I believe 5777. And it's September 23rd is, of course, 777 days before November 9th, 2019. So, I mean, so it's very interesting how all these things fit together as far as understanding 2014, 2017, and then 2020. So we can see in some ways that that was fulfilled in that context. Samuel Snow's letters end on July 18th. Now, here we're applying this though to our history, right? So we're taking this story of Judges chapter 15, and we're saying that it's going to be connected with our history here. So how do we do this? I mean, how do we take something that we could apply earlier in our history, but now we're applying it really to, 2021, the end of our 777 structure. Oh, so Samuel asked the question, why have we not yet come to midnight, isn't it? So I mean, this is one of the things we're going to go through in the lines simply presented, because we've gone through it a number of times, but just to explain the idea of midnight. Midnight is what waymark is midnight in a line? I mean, what is midnight? Think about Millerite history. Midnight is what? July 21st, 1844 is what?
Midway.
It's midway, right? And it's the center of a chiasm. The cross is midnight. Now, when we talk about midnight, I mean, we've passed midnight many times, haven't we? Have we passed midnight many times?
I would think we have in many different ways.
Right. So, and that, how would we explain that? If we've passed midnight, but we're still looking for midnight, how did that happen? Wouldn't it depend what line we're in?
Very much.
So when we look at midnight that we have, that Jeff was always talking about, that we first found in Millerite history, we know that midnight is in connection with a bigger line than the ones that we've passed midnight in already. That is, in Millerite history, if you take midnight what it is, it's July 21st, 1844. And then you have the midnight cry, August 15th, 1844. And then you have the arrival of the third angel's message. And the next thing Ellen White's looking for is Revelation 18, the Sunday law. Now, the Sunday law is going to be followed by the loud cry, which parallels the midnight cry. And then there's going to be a close of probation. So if we were going to look at Ellen White's illustration of what the loud cry is and what the Sunday law is, I mean, the Sunday law then parallels what event in Millerite history? Because if the midnight cry parallels the loud cry, and the loud cry comes after the Sunday law, what event in Millerite history parallels midnight, or not parallels midnight. What event? Because we have midnight in Millerite history. What event is that in our line? Wouldn't it be the Sunday law? Because if the loud cry parallels the midnight cry comes after midnight, right? So midnight must be the Sunday law. Do you follow that logic?
No disagreement.
Okay. So when we talk about midnight in Ellen White's line, we're talking about the Sunday law itself, right? As a repetition of history. She doesn't specifically say midnight is paralleled by the Sunday law, but since the loud cry is paralleling the midnight cry, then the Sunday law must parallel midway or midnight from Millerite history. So it's just simple logic. There's nothing complicated about it. But we have a midnight and a midnight cry that precede the Sunday law. And that's because we're looking at a repetition of Millerite history that was originally, Jeff didn't understand this originally. He came to understand it as we began to zoom into the repeat of Millerite history. We started to recognize that there was this midnight and midnight cry that preceded the Sunday law, because that's the repeat of Millerite history, the repeat of the first and second angels' messages. And since 9/11, we have this repeat of the second angel's message, because 9/11 serves two purposes. It's an empowerment of the first angel's message, and it's the arrival of the second. So what we were having problems with is we were having problems distinguishing what line we were in. So this midnight that's still future is this midnight on our big line from 1989 to the Sunday law. But that line itself is just a zoom into the Sunday law waymark on Ellen White's line. So once we start to understand the zoom ins, that you zoom into a waymark and you create a reform line that has its own waymarks, and you can zoom into a waymark on that reform line and it's going to have its own waymarks. Now, some of those waymarks will be the waymarks on the line above, right? So we saw this when we went through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, that there's these different reform lines, and that some of the waymarks on Abraham's reform line were also waymarks on Isaac's reform line, but they weren't the same waymark. They served a different purpose in Isaac's reform line than they did in Abraham's. Now, this movement got a little bit confused when Parminder started coming in, because originally we were on the right track when it came to the idea of zooming into a waymark, that each waymark typified each other waymark, and that each waymark wasn't indeed a reform line. But Parminder tried to take this away from us by saying that waymarks cannot typify each other, with no real good reason to say that. And he had this new system of lines, the priests, Levites, and the Nethinim, that were staggered. And this really brought more confusion in, because he actually brought in another line as well, which was the line of the 144,000, which made no sense. And then claimed that the 144,000 were only the priests, not the Levites, which of course is wrong. And he had some reasons for it, but he was mixing analogies and mixing lines and taking things out of context. So I'm not going to go into all of that, but I knew it was wrong right from the beginning, because I understand the 144,000 based on the spirit of prophecy. So he had to reject the spirit of prophecy to do that. So that's answering your question. And it's an important question, because here, when we're looking at our history and we're looking at all of these different stories, these different lines, we zoom into different waymarks on these different lines. So when we zoomed into, we zoomed into this waymark here, when we were studying Judges 13, this became a zoom into July 18th. When we were studying Judges 14, this is really a waymark centered around the 20th day of the 9th month, right? December 25th, 2021. And we might argue here that we're still in Judges 15, we're still addressing this latter part of this reform line. Because Judges 2019, the whole point here is this first day of the 10th month and the first day of the first month. Right? So we've established some things about this, that this connects us to April 5th, 2030. It connects us to the end of Colin's study. It's a period of 88 days in Ezra chapter 10. And we took the 88 days as a day for a month, and 88 months is the exact same time from the end of January 11th, 2023 to April 5th, 2030. That's 2,640 days. And then we found another way to arrive at that as well, going from the first day of the 10th month and taking these 30-day, 30 times 30 plus 30 plus 30 to be 2,658 days if we used months of 29.53. So we're multiplying a month of 29.53, which is the actual length of a lunar month, by three 30-day months. And that's going to give us 2,658 days, which goes to April 5th, 2030 as well. So there was this second witness. Now, then, if we look at this is just a continuation of this, right? So now we left these waymarks here from the other one. We haven't actually addressed them yet. But you're going to see a divorce happen here, right? In Judges 15. Am I correct in that sense? Because Samson gets married in Judges 14, but is he divorced in Judges 15? Or do we need to understand this?
Yes, in Judges 15.
Okay, Stephen first.
Yeah, I'm thinking like Joseph, when he was due to be married to Mary,
Yeah.
or whatever, he sort of put her away secretly. He was going to do that, but then he continued. So I'm just wondering, would have been a divorce if he had done that? Or because I'm just thinking it's more like not just maybe carrying out the marriage. You know, you maybe wouldn't say the marriage is complete until it's consummated.
Well, yeah, but yeah, and that's why, I mean, when I'm saying divorce here, it's basically, it's not quite the same, but in Jewish law, I mean, you're married, you have to, it's a contract, right? That's been made, you know, between the families. And so here, this contract would have been broken. So it's a type of divorce, but yeah, it's not an actual, you know, divorce, but their system of marriage is very, very different from ours. Angela, you had a thought? Was that Angela?
No, I was just pointing out that it's in Judges 15 too, where his wife is put away, but this is involuntarily, like it's nothing to do with him wanting that to happen.
No, I know. But I'm just trying to put the parallel there to the story of Ezra, right? Which we're using here.
Yes. Okay.
Right. So there is this separation that happens from a wife, right? It's, you know, however you want to look at it. I mean, this is a little bit different story, but you know, his wife is put away in some way. He doesn't do it. You know, the The family just does it. They break the contract. They didn't think that Samson wanted to marry her. They thought he utterly hated her, right? That's what the dad says. So she's given to someone else, but then is offered the younger sister, right? So the younger sister, of course, I'm saying is Omega, but this is about God's providence in what has happened in our lines. It's being presented in this story, which we would call, ironically moral or morally ironic, I guess. But people are being given a choice, a life and death choice. Now, this happens at the time of wheat harvest, so we know that it happens at Pentecost, and it connects us to these two presentations, Collins and Odilios. So then we have to figure out what the rest of this story is. Samson said, concerning them, now shall I be more blameless than the Philistines, though I do them a displeasure. And Samson went and caught 300 foxes. So the thing about the 300 foxes is this ties us to the story of Gideon, right? And we had placed the 300 in connection with July 18th. So this is going to reference us back to this story of the 300. But we're saying that this is, at this point, are we going to go back there? So are we going to take these first 3 verses, sort of address this period of the divorcement with them? Or are we going to continue on with this story? Because the 300 foxes would generally bring us back, but could this be a repeat of history? That is, can we take this story of Pentecost and recognize that it's a type of anniversary? It's a type of repeat of history. Even though it brings us to the end of this line, that in a sense, our movement is now repeating a history that we've already experienced, a sense given a second chance or something like that. I'm not sure how to put it. But we go through something. We're going through something right now, which is based upon an anniversary. And so I still don't know how to characterize it. I hope people can understand what I'm saying. Because, so Samson catches these 300 foxes. Now, what do these foxes represent? Now, there was talk about whether they're a jackal or whatever it is. I don't know if that particularly matters, because we're not really sure what these animals are. But we do have the symbol of a fox, which we can connect to Herod. And we haven't addressed that symbol yet. Why?
Yeah,
Yep.
there's an application you can do through, I think it's Ezekiel 17, 16, 13. Talks about foxes as false prophets.
Right. Yeah. So that's how we were really applying it before when we went through this before. Okay. So here, I'm going to go back. Give me the exact reference of that, but I'll go back here and just how we were looking at this before. So when we looked at chapter 15 before, we weren't attaching it as we are now to the end of this line. We had gone back to 9/11, right? And we're just going to go through that history again of what 9/11, or not 9/11. We start at 9/11 or 11/9, right? And then we're going to have the story of July 18. And so these 300, we're just taking the symbol of the 300, that's Gideon's, right? So we're connecting that, but we didn't really sort a lot of this out. So it's Ezekiel 13, verse 4, dealing with the false prophets. So in Ezekiel 13:4, it's where, "O Israel, thy prophets are like the foxes of the desert," right? So this is the false prophets being condemned, right?
Okay, but if we are going to properly follow Miller's rules in this, shouldn't we also be looking at Nehemiah 4:3 and Song of Solomon 2:15?
Yeah, we're gonna look at all the foxes, right?
Okay,
Yep. We always do that. So here, I'll just put in foxes. So the foxes spoil the vine. That's Song of Solomon. It's one of my scripture songs. Take us the foxes, the little foxes that spoil the vines. And that word take just means capture for us. So Song of Solomon's a little bit kind of obscure. A lot of people don't recognize all these different symbols and how they fit. Like who the Shulamite is and stuff is important. But anyway, in verse 14, it says, "Oh, my dove, that art in the clefts of the rock, in the secret places of the stairs. Let me see thy countenance. Let me hear thy voice, for sweet is thy voice, and thy countenance is comely." So this is a revelation of Christ, correct? This is Moses in the cleft of the rock. Would we agree with that?
I'd have to think about that for a bit.
Well, he's in the cleft of the rock, and let me see thy countenance. Let me hear thy voice. And the countenance here is the word mareh, right? That's the one that deals with the 2300 days.
Right, the Mare vision.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we have the mareh, this one, and the marah, right? So this is the mareh. And so this is the 2300 days, this word secret. Okay. And then you have the cleft of the rock, you have this revelation of Christ. And, I make the argument, it doesn't matter whether it's, I take the 2300 days as a revelation of Christ as well, but it's just not the form that we have as the looking glass. Okay, and then you have the stairs and madrega. What's that, madrega? Anybody know what the places of the stairs, what that would be an understanding of?
That relate to the ladder,
Okay.
Jacob's ladder, maybe?
Yeah, so I would think, even though it's not really the same word or anything, but it would be something like this, that the ladder that connects heaven and earth, because let me see thy countenance. Right. And then you're going to have this whole thing, see that countenance, again, that's mareh. And then for the mareh is comely, that's neveh, that's Hebrews number 5,000, suitable, beautiful. And then it says, capture for us the foxes, right? Seize us the foxes, the little foxes that spoil the vines, for our vines have tender grapes. And it's going to lead up until the daybreak and the shadows flee away. Turn away, my beloved, be thou like the roe or the young hart upon the mountains of Bether. Feedeth among the lilies. So this is, if we're going to talk about the day breaking, that's going to be the morning, right? It's kind of the day here is sort of like an account of or whatsoever. It's kind of a funny word. So Daniel puts here September 11, 2001, 9/11, 2001, 9 plus 11 plus 2001 equals 2021. Okay. That's 19 plus 11, which is 20. So that wouldn't that give us 2020? let me see, 2021. Yes, you're right, 2021. So 19 plus 11 is 20, plus 2001 is 2021. Okay, so I'm not sure why we have that, but there it is. And so we have this 2014 and 2017 in these two verses. Hiding in the cleft of the rocks is 2014, and Song of Solomon, until the daybreak, the shadows flee away. That's 2017. That's the way I'm reading this.
All right, you made your point as to how you're seeing it, so I'm gonna ask a counterpoint.
Okay,
Who's speaking?
this is the Shulamite, I think. This is
It-
really hard to tell, okay? So this could be Christ speaking. So this could be so it's really hard to tell. So that because it's constantly changing back and forth. And I studied Song of Solomon in detail, trying to figure out who was speaking when. And so often when it says, "Oh, my dove," that's normally the Shulamite speaking to the beloved.
So I'm gonna ask it in this way.
Yeah.
Is it possible this is the 144,000 beholding Christ?
Well, I think that's the whole point of it. So the way that I understand the Song of Solomon, so you have the Shulamites. If you go back to the Song of Solomon, the Song of Song, which is Solomon's, right? The Song of Songs. So you got a doubling here, correct? Okay.
You have several doublings.
Yes, but it's the Song of Songs. So that's a doubling, right? Which is Solomon's. And then it's going to start out, "Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for thy love is better than wine." So this is the Shulamite speaking, we're going to find out. Right? Because of the savor of thy good ointments, and the name is as an ointment poured forth, therefore do the virgins love thee. So you're going to have all these symbolism that you could use in the parable of the 10 virgins. You know, there's all things, this chamber, you can look at these things as the curtains being in the sanctuary. You know, the truths, the vineyards, right? And then there's going to be other people involved here. You're going to have the beloved, who really goes unnamed. And then you have the Shulamite, who is, of course, the feminine form of the name Solomon, right? So in a sense, this is a love poem in the style of the day that Solomon writes, where it's talking about God's love towards him. That's the way that it would be understood. And then you're going to have Solomon, the beloved is going to talk about the bride, the woman, right? All of her characteristics. But you're going to see that a lot of these, we wouldn't use these in love poetry today. But a lot of these are symbols. The beams of our house are cedar and the rafters of fir. There's all of these different sort of very rich imagery that you see in the Song of Solomon. Now, when it says, "I am the rose of Sharon and the lily of the valleys," that's the bride speaking. That's not the beloved speaking. Right. But we know there's a hymn, you know, "He's the rose of Sharon, he's the lily of the valleys." But actually that's referring to Solomon, who represents, in a sense, the church, because he's the king, right? He's the Shulamite. He brought me to his banqueting house, and his banner over me was love, right? So this is the Shulamite speaking. "Stay me with flagons, comfort me with apples, for I am sick of love." So lovesick, right? "His hand is under my head, and his right hand doth embrace me. I charge ye, O daughters of Jerusalem, by thy roes and by the hinds of the field, that ye stir not up nor awake my love till he please," right? So there's there's going to be these daughters of Jerusalem that are going to be part of this narrative as well. And then the bride adores her beloved, right? The voice of her beloved. The bride adores her beloved. The voice of my beloved. Behold, he cometh, leaping upon the mountains, skipping upon the hills. And so she describes her beloved. And then the beloved spake and said, rise up, my love, my fair one, and come away. For lo, the winter is past, the rain is over and gone, the flowers appear on the earth, etc. The fig tree putteth forth her grapes. And then, O my dove, thou art in the clefts of the rock. This is the Shulamite speaking again. Right? So that's how I understand this. But you'll see different people commenting on this, and they have different ideas about it, but that's how I understand it. So the question is this the 144,000? Well, Solomon, as the king, does he not represent God's people? Because Solomon's here is the bride. Is the bride represent God's people?
Yes.
I would think that that's a better definition.
Okay. Okay, so the bride represents God's people. Now, we know that the king is a type of Christ, but Christ also does represent God's people. Right? I mean, the character of Christ, when his character is perfectly reproduced in his people, then he shall come to claim them as his own. Comment in the chat there.
Okay.
Yeah, so you're just taking the vines having tender grapes, connecting us to 9:11, because the sum is 9:11, that verse. And the reverse is 13:533. So we have all those symbols of the 1335 and the 1533 in there, and the 153. In the reverse, that would be the reverse Bible verse. So that's the 13,533 verse from the end of the Bible. Aran?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're counting from the end of the Bible, that's the verse. But it being 9:11, I think, is, even if you look at the idea of the vines themselves, they have tender grapes. This is referring to, how would we connect that with 9/11? I mean, this more means that the vines are in blossom. Tender grapes would refer often to them being in bloom. Would not that be 9/11? They're the budding forth, right? Isn't that what we tied to 9/11?
Yeah, it connects with Isaiah chapter 27 verses 8, I think, or 6 and 8.
Isaiah 27 verses 6. He shall cause them to come of Jacob to take root. Israel shall blossom and bud and fill the face of the whole world with fruit. And in verse 8, and measure when it shooteth forth, thou wilt debate with it. He stayeth the rough wind in the days of the east, in the day of the east wind. So Jeff has always applied this to 9/11. So I think we can safely do that here. So when we're looking at the Song of Solomon and these foxes, and so it's asking to capture the foxes. So the foxes do bring us to 9/11. Now, the other verses that we had that were mentioned before. I mean, I mentioned, of course, Herod being a fox, which would be a reference to him being not so much a false prophet, but who was Herod claiming to be? What was the role of Herod? Wasn't he sort of considered to be the king of the Jews, so to speak?
He's trying to take over the title of King of the Jews. Was he not?
He had been set as the king of the Jews by the Romans.
Right. So the Romans put him as king of the Jews. He considers himself the king of the Jews. But Jesus calls him a fox, which I think would just mean that he's a counterfeit. Right? Like that's why the false prophets are foxes. They're counterfeits. They're not.
But Jesus was speaking not of Herod the Great, but as one of his successors. So he's basically, isn't he saying that all of the Herods are as foxes?
Yeah. This is obviously not Herod the Great. You know, this is the other Herod, the one that took the head of John the Baptist. Right. So, but yeah, he's still considered to be the king of the Jews. They put the Herod family in charge of Judea, right? So they're supposed to be the rulers, the leaders, right? Of course, and that's why you have different groups. You have the Herodians who believe that Herod is the true king of the Jews. You have the Zealots who want to overthrow the Romans, right? You have these different groups. So the Herodians and the Zealots, of course, are at odds with each other. Okay. So that does make helps us a little bit with this symbol of the foxes. So the foxes that spoil the vines at 9/11, what are those that need to be captured? Okay, well, Romulus and Remus were fed by wolves, not foxes, but there is some similarity. It's just there in the chat. So that he's called the fox. So that has to do with the history of Rome. I don't know. I would take it more that it refers to that he's a false representative. He's not the true king, but
So the Herod that caused the death of John the Baptist, was that Herod Antipas?
yeah, I believe so. I always get them mixed up, but I think it's Herod Antipas. Yeah.
So this is Herod Antipas, the one using Antipas in its meaning that is like the Father.
Yeah.
So he's representing his father, Herod the Great. But is he also not a false representation of God the Father?
Okay, I don't follow.
Wasn't he the one that died? He sort of said he was like a god.
Right.
Yeah.
He gave an oratory.
Yeah. So he's a counterfeit.
Correct.
Okay, that's what we understand here. Foxes represent something that's a counterfeit. Now, so Samson capturing these 100 foxes then, or 300 foxes, pardon me. And he puts firebrands between their tails. We know that this represents a chiasm, right? In the midst between two tails. And we know that tails also represent false prophets. Correct?
Yes.
So we have two different symbols here that can relate to false prophets. Okay, so if we're looking at, well, the one thing you know is if there is a false, there is a true. But here in this story of Samson, we're just looking at these symbols of what they mean. So Samson, he has to catch these 300 foxes. Now we put the 300 as Gideon's 300 as a symbol. Do we attach these two symbols together, or is this a counterfeit?
I would be thinking we would have to attach the symbols together because you have 300 men with their pitchers and torches. Here you have 300 foxes.
Right. Yeah, we're definitely tie them together that way, but I'm just saying, is this a counterfeit of the other 300? I mean, the counterfeit has to have the same aspect to it, right? Now you got the 300, but here you have foxes and tails. Now Samson's going to capture these foxes, right? Just like in the Song of Solomon, take us the foxes, capture us the foxes. And so you have all of this, and they're also though going to set them among the standing corn, right? So here you have the beginning of the wheat harvest. This is Pentecost. And he's going to take these foxes and let them loose in the wheat fields, right? And they're going to burn up the corn and the vineyards and the olives. So is this something that we go back and we look at and we'll say, well, this deals with July 18th and the 300 who do this proclamation of July 18th, because that's how we dealt with the 300 before? Or do we take this 300 as a counterfeit message that has to be undone, right? And if we look at this in connection with this divorce, is this telling us about the divorce that happens in this movement? Is this capturing of these 300 foxes and them setting them, the tails on fire and putting them amongst the wheat? Is that the work that is going to be happening now in this movement?
With what we're talking about here, the torches are producing two things.
Mhm.
What two things are they?
Well, they're going to produce light
Yes.
and heat.
Okay. Now it's going to be light in the fields, but it's also going to be heat, which will destroy the fields.
Right.
Now, I'm assuming that we're looking at this literally and not figuratively.
Okay, what do you mean by that? I'm not sure what you mean literally. I mean, we're only looking at this as a symbol.
Okay.
Cool.
But we're looking at it then as a symbol. We're not looking at it ironically. Or are we?
Okay. So when we look at the ironic nature, that has to do with the moral aspects of Samson himself. We can't take every aspect of the story and flip it around. That's not what the ironic, because that's what some people have been trying to do all the time, is sort of say, well, we have to take this and do the opposite. But that's not what the moral irony is telling us. We look at the moral aspects of Samson's character. His character is not a Christ-like character in what he's doing. So we just say all of these things that are showing that Samson is bad, we're going to recognize that this is the work of Christ. Samson is a good symbol, not a bad symbol. Then what he's doing, these actions that he's doing, we look at the symbols of these actions, like the symbols that are used in these stories of all these different events. And we just understand those symbols in their normal sense. We don't try to flip them around. We don't say foxes, which are bad, are false prophets, that these are then true prophets, right? We're going to say that foxes and tails and all these things, we're just going to take those in their normal sense. That is, this is false prophets. And Samson, who's a good symbol, he's going to capture these false prophets and he's going to use them to burn up the wheat harvest. And this wheat harvest is the wheat harvest of the Philistines. Right? So the doctrines, the vineyards, these are all this false part of our message that still exists within the message, because we've understood that the purpose of Samson, the purpose of that message, is to correct God's people. So God's people have these false teachings, these false understandings, these false doctrines, false ways of studying God's word. And so that's how we've understood Samson to be, right, as a symbol. He represents Christ, but morally he doesn't. Does that help, that explanation? Or does anybody disagree with it or have something to add to it?
There was a comment in the chat
Mm-hmm.
giving reference to Hebrews 12:29.
Okay, so for our God is a consuming fire. Okay. Yeah, so what we're looking at in this story of Judges 15, I mean, this is the work of God in correcting this movement. That's how I understand it. And that's what Samson represents. He represents that, he's sunlight. Okay, so do we know the year? I don't think so. We can't narrow down Samson to a year. Because that was a question in the chat.
Now, also from the chat, as we were talking before, apparently we have missed a verse in this consideration.
Yeah.
Nehemiah 4:3. Now Tobiah the Ammonite was by him, and he said, even that which they build, if a fox go up, he shall even break down their stone wall. The book verse is 67. The reverse sum is 1629, combined 2781.
Right, so this is the opposition to the work of building the streets and walls, right? Well, this is the walls specifically. Right, and you have this Ammonite. And this is Tobiah the Ammonite saying this, even that which they build, if a fox go up, he shall even break down their stone wall. Right, so this is, if we go back, but it came to pass that when Sanballat heard that we builded the wall, he was wroth and took great indignation and mocked the Jews. So this is a mockery of their wall. Right, so, but anyway, the interesting thing about this verse is the reverse sum is 66. Well, the book verse is 66, pardon me. The reverse sum is 1629. And the combined sum is 2781. So that's going to be the 18th of July, 2020. Right, July 18, 2020, the combined, and the 1629, that's Odilio's number. And that's one thing to point out too about this 1629, because this is the number that Odilio brought out on February 12th, 2022. And what's the significance of the 1629? It has all of these numerical relationships to other numbers that we have, right?
It's also the length of the siege, I think.
That's the length of the siege from when,
No, it's not. It's actually just from when Ezekiel began to predict the siege to when the siege occurred.
right, yeah, so from when the siege is predicted to when the siege occurs. So that's from July 21st, 592 BC to the 10th day of the 10th month in 587 BC, right? So that's going to be whatever is January 8th or something. I can't remember the date. Right, so it's going to be 1629 days. So, and we already use 1629 in connection with our lines. So, but the fact that it's here in this verse that talks about the fox, what would be the significance of that? We have the July 18 and the 1629 and the fox. So is there any? So it's the 66th verse of that book of Nehemiah. The gematria of the verse is 1629 in reverse sum, and the combined, and that means if you took 2781 and you subtracted 1629, you would get the regular sum. So whatever that number is. But how are we going to see the significance of what's being talked about here with this mocking of the Ammonite? Is this an attack upon July 18th that's being talked about? Is there an attack upon July 18th in the movement presently?
Yes,
But is it done in a fox-like way?
Yes.
Right? And we see this as the division that exists in the movement, right?
right, correct.
The division that exists is not done in the open, right? It's done in, for lack of a better word, an underhanded way, right? Satan doesn't work in the open, he works in the dark. He works by insinuation. He doesn't address things directly.
In secret.
Yeah, it's in secret, but in a secret in a bad way, not in the secret like Palmoni. So, so this is I mean, I would say that the fox here represents an attack upon the message. And we know the walls were built in 52 days. Day for a year, 52 years is a prophetic 18720 days, right? So if we take the 52 days that the walls are built, they represent July 18th. So we can see that the walls that are being mocked are July 18th. Now, who is this Tobiah the Ammonite? Like as a symbol. His name means the goodness of Jehovah. But he's an Ammonite, right? So,
Right, he's not part of the children of Israel.
okay, right? And he's mocking, but his name means the goodness of Jehovah. Right, we know that it's the son of Lot. Right, name sort of means it relates to being inbred. Son of, because Ammon means literally, what's the word? Because it's Ammon, it's Ammi, my people, right? So Ammon, so it has to do with being inbred anyway. I can't remember, there's something else to it there. So this mocking of July 18th. We can see that this fox then relates to this symbol, right?
Correct.
Foxes are known as being crafty.
They're known as being sly, secretive,
Yeah.
destructive.
Mhm.
So here's Tobiah. Was by him. Now, who's the him?
This is going to be just at the beginning, it talks about either it's going to be Sanballat who's mocking.
No, I mean, Tobiah's the one that's doing the mocking, but Sanballat is who he's with.
Right. Well, he mocked. It says it came to pass when Sanballat heard that we builded the wall, he was wroth and he took great indignation and mocked the Jews. And he spake before his brethren in the army of Samaria and said, what do these feeble Jews? Will they fortify themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they make an end in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of the rubbish which are burned? Now Tobiah the Ammonite was by him, and he said, even that which they build, if a fox go up, he shall break down their stone wall. Right.
So Tobiah is standing by Sanballat and he's basically seconding what Sanballat's saying.
Yep. Yeah. Well, so he's seconding it. And in a sense, he's saying, also he's kind of saying, well, what they're doing isn't gonna last.
Right.
Right. So this is the fox. So this message of the fox, we can tie back to Judges 15.
Well, if we also look just a little further down,
Yeah.
Nehemiah 4:7 gives you Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabians. the Ammonites, and the Ashdodites.
Yeah,
So you have 5.
okay.
So are these the 5 foolish virgins?
Well, I would think so.
So those that are not only mocking July 18th, they're also mocking the 2520. They're standing, they are off the platform.
Mhm. Yeah, and they also are conspiring, all of them together, to come and fight against Jerusalem and to hinder it.
Right.
Okay. So now there's 300 foxes here in the story of Samson, and we then can take this to represent that this is a counterfeit of the 300 of Gideon, which is where I would look at here. So I'm not going to take this. So what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to take this story and take this 300 foxes and then turn the symbol around to represent 300 of Gideon, right? I'm going to say that we have here a counterfeit of Gideon. And this is what Samson is going to capture. And Samson, even though he's morally bad, he's a good symbol. And so this message of Samson is going to defend the truth against the attacks that are happening in this movement. And it's going to be done by this chiasm. So Samson's going to put these 300 foxes tail to tail, put a firebrand in the midst between the two tails. And he's going to use this to destroy the teachings, the understandings, the system of study, however you want to look at it, the Protestant system of study that has taken over this movement. And the thing is, we don't know it, right? See, this is part of the problem, that it's we've inherited things from Adventism that we don't want to let go. What are those things that we inherited from Adventism that we don't want to let go?
Some would say a misunderstanding of righteousness by faith.
Okay, well, that's the symptom. I mean, I don't know if that's the root of the problem. I mean, yes, there's a misunderstanding of righteousness by faith, but that could be easily remedied if we could get rid of the other major problems of Adventism that we've inherited. So the one is, we don't want to look like a cult, right?
Right.
So we want to be accepted. We want to be popular. We also don't want to have anything to do with time prophecy, right?
That's what the corporate church is fighting, yes.
Yeah, it's like the guy who read my paper the other day, yesterday, I guess it was.
Went to the pastor to talk
Yeah,
about
so he
it.
went to the pastor of his local church a few months ago, of an Adventist church. So I don't know if the guy's an Adventist, but he went to an Adventist church, attended it, waited till after the service, had to wait till all the way to the end. And then he wanted to ask this pastor something about time prophecy. And the pastor said, I don't have time for that.
Hmm.
So he said, it doesn't appear that Adventists are very interested in looking at time prophecy. And so he was impressed with my paper. One is the precision in the paper, but also just that we have this interest in time. So I don't, know a lot about him yet, but he's going to be reading my paper. I sent him a link to some of my presentations. But the point here being that Adventists don't have an interest in time. I mean, why was the 2520 so strongly opposed in the Adventist church? Like, Jeff wasn't really that opposed. There was a few people who knew about him who didn't agree with him, mostly people from his past, or had connections with really conservative Adventism. But when the 2520 came out, why was there so much opposition? What's just on the surface? What did people think the 2520 was?
Distraction.
Well, they thought it was time setting, right?
They do.
Like the first person who ever said something to me personally about the 2520 in a negative sense said, so you think Jesus is going to come back in the year 2520 or 2025 or something, right? All they caught on is that there's a number there that could be a date that might be connected with time setting in some way. So it's obviously wrong. They didn't know anything about it. It's time setting, right?
Well, I think a lot of people just thought it was distraction from the 2,300 days. That this is something,
Mhm.
it wasn't going to be part of their evangelism program to talk about the 2520. They just
Yeah.
thought people don't need to hear about this here. Let's just focus with the basics of 2,300 days and so forth. That was how I got it. I didn't really sense much about that was relating to time setting.
Yeah, well, I never ran into that. So your experience is different than mine on that point. Yeah, so SDAs also have a bias on prophecies. They call it excitement. So anytime you're looking at the 2520, I just think back to the presentation I heard, I listened to.
All I ever had was people ignored it, wouldn't even talk to me about it.
Yeah. So it might be depending on the time in which you first come into the 2520 and how people saw it. But in 2010, people thought it was time setting. That's what I remembered. But, Stephen would have known about the 2520 before 2010. So he would have been following FFA. When were you following FFA, Stephen? Started
2009.
2009, yeah. So you might have come the initial, and also you're in the UK, so there's a little bit of difference there. But whatever the experience is, the point is that Adventists have inherited this fear of time, and in a sense, a fear of prophecy. Now, I think it was the guy from Arkansas. I can't think of his name offhand, but he did a presentation where he spoke against Jeff Pippinger, and he tried
To say that he was a weirdism?
no.
Sorry.
No, he spoke against Jeff, and he sort of, Eugene Pruitt, that was it. And he talked about all the excitement, how they're all just excited, like shaking like this, and they're all just so excited, and I'm thinking, like, obviously, it's not really anything that I ever saw about Jeff. The only thing I know that some of Jeff's videos, when he had that microphone that went by his mouth and he'd always breathe into it, it could have maybe sounded like he was excited or something.
Or angry, maybe?
Or angry. But I saw this movement as a pretty cerebral and basically devoid of excitement. So I didn't think that was an honest depiction, but I think that many people think of, or they fear, excitement, right? So if somebody's presenting something, and I've had that accusation against me, oddly, that somehow I'm, presenting things that are sensational within the movement. This was a characterization that was made of me by several different people when we were at the School of the Prophets is I was always looking for the sensational. Oddly, I think one of them was Tanya Beeman, which really made no sense because she tends to like the sensational. Now, all of the things that we found, I mean, they are pretty exciting in a sense, but I don't dig up, just to have like the next exciting thing, to just keep people like with a carrot, leading them on. I'm trying to understand the truth, to dig into scripture. The fact that we find such amazing things in scripture, we're not doing it for some emotional high. We're doing it because we want to understand the truth. We want to be like Christ. So, so these sort of attacks that happen on prophecy or what we're doing, they're definitely misplaced. This movement would be more about looking at things soberly rather than being caught up in some kind of excitement. But there are people caught up in excitement. I mean, Adventism tends to attract people who like the sensational, partly because of how we did our evangelistic series. But so if we're going to look at this, then what we've basically dealt with today is this this line. So we go back to our line. Where would we put? So this is the time of the wheat harvest. We have these two messages that are going to be marking Pentecost. So we would have to put the foxes after that. So that means that if we're going to give it a date, well, I'm just going to do it this way here. We got two dates here, January 11th, December 25th, that we're marking as the 10th day. So I'm going to put here the foxes, 300 foxes. Whoop, it's not how you spell foxes. So that's what I'm going to do. But that's when the 300 foxes are going to be captured. And they started to be captured on December 25th. We got to January 11th. Now, remember, we're not like predicting any kind of event here. We're just using this as a symbol of these dates, because these dates, both these dates represent the first day of the 10th month. Now, maybe I could put them after the divorcement, but I'm putting them as part of this divorce because this is the action that Samson takes in response to his wife being given to someone else. Does this seem fair? I mean, at least just tentatively, does this would we want to put foxes like before or after that date? Or we just, because I'm just trying to connect it with the date that we have symbolically. That's why I'm putting it on the date, not between it. So put foxes on December 26th. Okay, so that I wouldn't put these. So there was a question about December 26th and about August 29th, 2019. So we're taking this story of Judges 15 and we're starting it with Colin and Odilio's presentations. So we're making this a continuation of chapter 14. Right? So we're saying chapter 14 really shouldn't have ended. It should have continued with this part of the story regarding the divorce and the foxes. The rest of chapter 15 is going to carry up and pick up another story. I don't think it's going to continue on. Okay, so the question regarding December 26th, because Daniel's asking that question. Okay. December 25th, 2022 which is this anniversary date, this bone date, right? On December 25th, 2022, I'm going to present the study on what is it? I can't remember how I title it. The lines simply presented, something like that. Now, that date connects to April 5th, 2030, because it's 3 months, which is 90 days, times 29.530,587 days. So you go from December 25th, 2022, it will bring you to April 5th, 2030. Right? Because that's what we understood here. So December 25th, 2022 is 2,658 days before April 5th, 2030. And so that's that 30, 30, 30 that we got from chapter 14. And we're saying that chapter 15 is just a continuation of this. It's going to bring us again to this history. It's telling us this history, what this history is about. It's about this divorce and about the removal of the false messages from this movement. And that would be all the conspiracy theory messages, things that are not following Miller's rules, that do detract from the message, the criticisms, of course, those types of things. And then we have January 11th, that's the end of Collins' structure. So that's going to be 88 times 30 days, 2,640. Right, so that's just another way we can come to April 5th. So we can use these two different dates to arrive at April 5th. And we're saying that that's when the foxes are captured and let loose in the fields. Okay, so we can pick this up tomorrow, but those are good questions. And I want people to study this out, to think about it a bit. I mean, because there are other ways, to look at this. People could try to take these stories and flip them around. But I don't think that we can do that. They could try to put this earlier. But to me, the Pentecost symbol is just too powerful with these 49 days here to miss. Okay. Any final thoughts before we pray? Okay. Let's pray. Dear Father in heaven, thank you once again for the time that we have had studying your word here. I pray for each person that they can contemplate these things. If we need to be corrected in our ideas, we ask that you can come and do that, that you can show us clearly what your word means. And I pray that you can be with each person, help them in their health problems, those that we love and care for around us who are struggling, and those even of us who are struggling with the battles that we face in this world. Be with us now. Continue to bless and keep us, we pray and ask in Jesus' name. Amen.